Everything we stand for is under attack. Our individual freedom is under attack. Our rights are under attack. The sovereignty of our nation is under attack. First, if those who were outraged had shown the same pride when Europe lost its strategic autonomy, tying its economy to autocratic regimes, or when European borders and our way of life were threatened by mass illegal migration, now we would live in a stronger Europe.
Rome woke up under a grey sky, but the atmosphere was electric. Helicopters circled above the Italian parliament as thousands gathered in the piazza chanting one word, libertà. Overnight, Italy had announced what once seemed unthinkable, its intention to withdraw from the European Union and seek membership in BRICS. The statement came directly from Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's office, released at dawn. It accused Brussels of economic tyranny and claimed that Europe no longer represents the will of sovereign nations but the agenda of unelected elites. The announcement hit Europe like a thunderclap. In Brussels, officials scrambled for emergency meetings. The European Commission president called it a tragic mistake driven by populism and misinformation. But markets told a different story. The euro began to slide, Italian bond yields soared, and social media exploded with the hashtag #ItAlExit trending across the continent. By noon, Meloni addressed the nation from Palazzo Chigi. She stood before a massive Italian flag, her tone defiant yet controlled. "We are not abandoning Europe," she said. "We are abandoning submission. The EU has become a cage. BRICS offers us a seat at the global table as equals, not subordinates." In Moscow, Vladimir Putin congratulated her personally. Russian state media called Italy's move a revolution in Western Europe. In Beijing, Xi Jinping's foreign ministry released a short statement. Italy has chosen independence. China welcomes dialogue. The reaction inside Italy was deeply divided. Northern industrial regions feared losing EU trade benefits, while southern towns erupted in celebration, waving flags and chanting, "Finally free from Brussels." Fishermen in Sicily celebrated the end of EU quotas, and small farmers called it a new dawn. In Berlin and Paris, panic spread. France's finance minister warned that Italy's exit would trigger an earthquake in the Eurozone. German newspapers accused Italy of betraying 60 years of European unity. Behind closed doors, EU diplomats discussed sanctions and emergency financial barriers to prevent contagion. At the Vatican, the Pope made a cautious statement urging unity and dialogue, though insiders whispered that even the Holy See feared political chaos if Italy fully detached from Europe's structure. Meanwhile, BRICS leaders moved quickly. Brazil's president offered immediate trade negotiations. India called it a historic chance to rebalance world economics, and Russia proposed direct energy deals to secure Italy's gas needs. Within a week, Rome hosted an informal BRICS forum, the first ever held on EU soil. Television networks across the world broadcast images of Chinese, Russian, and Indian delegations walking past EU flags lowered to half-staff. The symbolism was unmistakable. The Western economic order was beginning to crack. In the streets of Milan, protests turned violent as pro-EU demonstrators clashed with nationalists waving BRICS banners. The police struggled to maintain order. Italian banks limited withdrawals to prevent a run on deposits, while Germany announced the suspension of several joint industrial projects. Despite the turmoil, Meloni refused to back down. In an evening address, she declared, "Italy will not be intimidated by economic threats. We will write a new chapter for ourselves and for all nations tired of submission to Brussels." Across Europe, right-wing leaders celebrated her courage. Hungary's Viktor Orbán called it a courageous step toward multipolar freedom. Poland and Austria remained silent, but analysts noticed a subtle shift in their rhetoric about sovereignty and EU control. The European Parliament convened an emergency summit. The debate was heated and emotional. Some demanded Italy's immediate suspension from EU decision-making. Others begged for compromise, warning that punishing Rome could drive even more nations toward BRICS. Outside, thunder rolled over Brussels as journalists broadcast live from rain-soaked streets, declaring it the darkest day in EU history since Brexit. By nightfall, Italian television aired images of Meloni signing a preliminary memorandum with BRICS representatives. The crowd in Rome erupted in applause. Fireworks lit the sky as she proclaimed, "Italy's future is not in decline, it's in alliance." The next morning, global headlines carried one chilling phrase: the heart of Europe has shifted east. In Brussels, silence filled the corridors of the European Commission. Analysts warned that if France or Spain began to reconsider their roles next, the entire European project could unravel. But in Rome, Meloni stood triumphant on the balcony of Palazzo Chigi, waving to thousands chanting her name. The church bells of Rome rang, not for unity, but for the end of an era. The signing ceremony in Rome was unlike anything Europe had seen since the end of the Cold War. Cameras from every corner of the world captured the moment Giorgia Meloni shook hands with Sergei Lavrov, followed by China's vice premier and the Indian foreign minister. The marble halls of the Quirinale Palace echoed with applause from delegates wearing BRICS badges. For the first time, a founding member of the European Economic Community had crossed the line. Outside, crowds chanted, "Italia Libera." Fireworks burst above the Colosseum, yet behind the celebration, a storm was already gathering. Within 24 hours, Brussels froze all structural funds earmarked for Italy. The European Central Bank warned that Italian access to the Eurozone's financial safety nets would be under review. France and Germany issued a joint statement calling the move an act of economic self-destruction, but Meloni remained defiant. "We will not be punished for choosing partners who respect us," she told reporters. "The age of European arrogance is over." Across the Atlantic, Washington reacted sharply. The US Treasury announced sanctions on several Italian companies accused of facilitating strategic cooperation with sanctioned Russian entities. The State Department summoned Italy's ambassador, demanding clarification on whether BRICS membership would include military collaboration. Rome replied curtly, "Italy chooses peace and prosperity through diversity." In Moscow, Putin hailed the moment as a turning point in modern geopolitics. Russian news anchors spoke of the collapse of Western hegemony. Chinese commentators called Italy the European gateway of the new Silk Road. Beijing wasted no time. Construction contracts for ports in Trieste and Genoa were signed within days. The global markets shuddered. The euro fell to a 5-year low. Investors rushed to convert holdings into dollars and yuan. Italian exports to non-EU countries surged overnight as BRICS banks offered fast credit lines to Rome. For the first time in decades, the EU realized it no longer held economic monopoly over one of its own. In Brussels, tempers flared. Some demanded Italy's expulsion from the single market. Others warned that such a move would only accelerate Europe's decline. The European Parliament chamber became a battlefield of shouting and broken alliances. Smaller states like Slovakia and Greece quietly began questioning whether Brussels still served their national interests. Meanwhile, in Rome, the government established a new National Economic Independence Office tasked with redirecting trade and currency reserves toward BRICS partners. Chinese engineers arrived at Italian ports, while Russian energy experts negotiated long-term oil and gas contracts. Indian firms opened technology incubators in Milan, promising thousands of new jobs. But not everyone was celebrating. Pro-EU demonstrations erupted in Turin and Florence. University students marched with EU flags, shouting that Meloni had sold Europe's soul. Police patrols filled the streets. Tension crackled in the air. A nation divided between eastward ambition and Western memory. At NATO headquarters, silence reigned. Could an active NATO member fully integrate with BRICS without compromising security? US generals privately admitted that Italy's defection would make the Mediterranean strategically unstable. French naval commanders warned that the alliance's southern flank was now exposed to new influence. Then came the shock. Russia proposed a BRICS naval exercise in the Mediterranean, and Italy agreed to host. Within days, satellite images showed Russian frigates docking at Taranto under joint drills with Indian and Brazilian vessels. Washington's reaction was furious. The Pentagon suspended joint operations and hinted at troop relocations. Yet Meloni pressed forward. "The world is changing," she declared in a speech broadcast live to millions. "We refuse to be prisoners of an old order built on fear. Italy will trade with every nation that treats us with respect." In that moment, she became both heroine and villain, praised in the global south, condemned in the west. African leaders applauded her courage. Latin American commentators called her the European who broke the spell. Weeks later, at the first BRICS Plus summit featuring Italy, the Declaration of Rome was signed, a pledge to create an alternative global payment system independent of the dollar and euro. Analysts called it a financial rebellion. The US warned that participation would lead to sanctions, but several developing nations expressed interest. From the balcony of Palazzo Chigi, Meloni looked over the Roman skyline as church bells echoed through the evening. The EU had turned its back, but half the world was now extending a hand.